This is part 40 of AngularJS tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss Angular optional URL parameters. Let's understand these with an example. So here is what we want to do. At the moment, we are on list of students page. On this page, we want an interface to search students. For example, within the search text box, if I type letters MA and then when I click the search button, we want to search students and display the list of all student names that start with letters MA, as you can see here. In case if we don't enter anything within the search text box and then when I click the search button, then we want to display all student names. So here we are making student name optional. So let's see how to achieve this. Let's flip to Visual Studio. The first change is going to be within our ASP.NET Web Service. So to the student web service, we want to add another web method which is going to retrieve students by name. So let's make a copy of this getAllStudents web method that we already have and then modify it as required. So the first change that I'm going to do is to the name of this method. Let's call this getStudentsByName. Since we want to get students by name, let's include a parameter name. The next change is for the SQL Server query itself. Select star from TBL students where name like at name. So at name here is a SQL Server parameter. Let's create that SQL Server parameter object. So SQL parameter, let's call it param equals new SQL parameter. The name of the parameter is at name, and where is the value for this parameter coming from? The value is going to come from the method parameter itself. So value equals name, and notice here we are using SQL Server like operator, so let's use the percentage symbol. So for example, if we in the text box type MA like this, and then when we click the search button, this web method will be called and MA will be passed into the web method, and that should be passed to the SQL Server query. So here we are appending the percentage. That means our SQL Server query will be select star from TBL students where name like MA and then the percentage symbol. So the final thing that we need to do is associate the parameter with the command object. And now let's test our web method. So the web service should expose a new method getStudentsByName. Let's click on that, and for example when I type letters MA and then click invoke, the web method should return all the student names that start with letter MA. So we have Mark and we have Mary. Okay, so our web method is working as expected. That's the first change. The next change is within students controller. So we want a method that is capable of searching student names. So let's go ahead and do the required change within our students controller. So we are in our script.js file, and here we have our students controller function. So on the view model object, I'm going to expose a search method. So I'm going to call this search student, and this is going to be a function. So into the students controller function, I'm going to inject another built-in service, and that is going to be the location service. And how are we going to use this location service? We'll see that in just a bit. So we have our view model object. So I'm checking if there is a name property on the view model object. If there is a name property, then what we want to do is use the location service, and this location service has got this URL method. So what we want to do is, if a user has typed MA and then click the search button, we want to redirect the user to a different URL, and that URL is going to be /studentssearch/ and then to that we want to append whatever the user has typed in the text box, and that's going to come from the view model. Okay? Else, if the user did not type anything within the search text box, we still want the user to be redirected to /studentsearch, but we don't want to append anything in the URL because there's nothing in the search text box, meaning we want to display all the students. Okay, so that's our search student function. Now the next change is within students.html. So to the view itself, so on this page we want to display the search text box and the search button. So let's go to students.html. So just before list of students, I'm going to include this literal text name, and then we want a text box. So input type equals text, and the model for this text box is going to be name of the student. That's what we are going to type within the text box. Since we are using controller as syntax, let's prefix that with student controller dot name, and then we want a button as well. So button, and when we click this button, what we want to do, we want to call our search student function which we have just created. So student controller, and the name of the function is within our script file, and that is search student. So that is the function that we want to call when we click the search button. So the text on the button is going to be search. Okay, so those are the changes required within students partial template and students controller. The next change is to add a controller for searching itself. So what I'm going to do is make a copy of the students details controller and modify it as required. So let's paste it right there. And first of all, let's format this code. So the name of our controller is going to be students search controller. That's the name of our function, and we still want HTTP service and route params service. And what we are going to do here is, the first thing, we're going to create a view model object, initialize that with an instance of this controller, and then we're going to check if $route params, we have the route params service here. So if route params dot name, so we have the name parameter, then what we want to do is call a different web method. So if there is a name parameter, that means the user has typed something in the search text box, and in that case we want to call this web method GetStudentsByName. So GetStudentsByName, we want to issue a GET request to that, and that web method has got name parameter to which we have to supply a value, and that's going to come from the URL, and we are retrieving it from the URL using the name of the parameter name. We haven't defined that URL parameter yet. We'll do that in just a bit. Okay, and then we get a promise, and whatever data that we get back, we are going to populate that in the students property of the view model. Okay, so this is what we want to do in case if there is name parameter. In case if that is not there, in the sense if the user didn't type anything within the text box, then we want to get all the students. So what I'm going to do in that case is call get all students of our web method. So let's actually copy this piece of code and paste it within our else block. So if the user has typed something in the search text box, then call GetStudentsByName. If the user didn't type anything within the search text box, then call GetAllStudents. And then, whatever response we get, we are initializing the same property on the view model, students. Okay, so that's our students search controller function. The next step is to define a new route for searching students. So whenever we click the search button, we want the user to be redirected to a new route, and we are going to define that route right now. So here we are defining the route, so I'm going to make a copy of this route and then modify it as required. So when we click the search button, we want the user to be redirected to a different route, and that is students search, and we want to include a parameter in the URL as well, and the name of that parameter is going to be name, and we want this parameter to be optional. To make a URL parameter optional, all we do is include a question mark like that. Okay, and when we navigate to that route, we want a different template, and that's going to be students search template, which we have not created. We'll create that in just a bit. And then the controller is going to be students search controller, and we want to use the controller as syntax as well. So it's going to be students search CTRL. Alright, so that's our new route. And the final step is to create this student search template. So let's do that now. So let's right click on the templates folder, add, and we want to add a new HTML file, and the name of the file is going to be student search. Let's click OK, and in the interest of time I have already typed some HTML, so let's copy and paste it here. So notice we have an h1 element, and then we have a table here where we set border to 1, and we have collapsed the border, and within the table head we display the column headers, ID, name, gender, and city. And then look at what we are doing here. On the tr element we are using ng repeat and looping through each search result, and then we are retrieving and displaying student ID, name, gender, and city. So straightforward HTML. So let's save all our changes and let's reload our web page. And now let's go to students page. So notice now we've got an interface to search students. Now if I type letters MA and then click search button, look at that, for some reason it's not doing anything. Let's see why is that. Let's launch browser developer tools by pressing F12 key, and let's click the search button. So at the moment it's not displaying anything, no errors whatsoever. Let's see why is that. Let's go to students.html. So here we're using students controller dot search student. That's a function. So a function should have opening and closing parentheses. That's the reason why it's not being called. So let's include them, and now let's reload our app, and at this point let's type MA and let's click the search button. Look at that, we are redirected to a new URL /studentsearch/MA, and then look at the search results. We see the list of all student names that starts with letter MA. Now let's go back to students and let's not type anything within the search text box, and then when I click the search button, look at this, we are still redirected to /studentsearch, but this time we don't have name parameter value in the URL, and we see all the students. So this is an example that explains how to use optional URL parameters in Angular. Thank you for listening and have a great day.